Hello, everybody. This is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And it's a blessing to have Olaf Hage with us. Olaf searches news behind the news, and he has some very interesting articles that he produces, and you can get copies of these by subscribing to them, and I'll let Olaf explain how. Hi, Olaf.
Hi, Georgianne. Well, I'm going to be making these available as e-reports, and we also have them available on CDs for those who want to get to the very beginning of all of this. They can go to my distributor's website, and they are available on CDs there, along with the audio reports that we do each month. And they can get it on the beginning of that. And the distributor's website is before 2012 and beyond.com.
Okay.
Thank goodness for the beyond part, right?
Yeah.
So that's before, BEFORE, 2012 and beyond, all one word, .com. And they have the subscriptions there to the CDs, and of course they have also some other individual audio files that you can purchase to listen to as well. And then, as I say, I plan to also produce e-reports that will be available sometime, hopefully before the end of this year, which will zero in on the kind of material we've been talking about with Typhon. And I'll be posting that information on my own website, which is theTimeQuest.com, TheTimeQuest. Just think of somebody looking for the time, looking for a watch or something like the Mad Hatter, I guess, or something. But theTimeQuest.com. Don't forget the, because otherwise you'll end up with some Chinese trading company and you'll be die or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So make sure you go theTimeQuest.com. And there's a link there, by the way, at the first page, I think, to the before 2012 and beyond site. And I haven't updated that website in a long time. I don't update, obviously, my distributor's site. They do their own thing. But I mean, I haven't updated the TimeQuest.com website in a long time. So if you haven't been there in a while, it's probably going to look exactly the same as it did the last time you went. But there are about 100 pages or something, I guess, of downloadable material there.
And it's good material.
Yeah, and it's amazing how well it has held up over the almost decade and a half, I guess, that it's been up there.
Yeah.
We've got articles tying the birth of Jesus to 2001, the 9/11 event. And the reason I tied it in is, well, when I put up the articles in 1998, and then 3 years later, we had the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center and, the Pentagon. And what was interesting is that it occurred on the anniversary of the birth of Jesus, which was like 3 years earlier. And at the time, I thought, well, that's interesting, but I didn't think it meant anything in particular. And then I began to notice that there was a very curious little detail that I had missed, namely the book of Isaiah.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Jonathan Cahn. He's a Messianic rabbi in New Jersey. He's apparently very well known in some circles. He's written a new book called The Harbinger, which has become a big New York Times best-selling book. And it's, among other things, he gets into this whole question of whether 9/11 was predicted in the Bible. And he says that, and I know this isn't what we were going to talk about, but the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Well, let's get around to what we were going to talk about.
All right. But anyway, so he figured out that Isaiah 9 had some verses in it that were directly relevant to the 9/11 attack. And he talked about a big fig tree that was going to be knocked down and how they were going to plant I think it's a pine tree or something in place of it, and that the stones would be knocked down, but they were going to rebuild with new stones and so forth. And the passage was quoted by I think it was the senator who was in charge of the Senate at the time, Tom Daschle. And it was also quoted by John Edwards, who was the vice presidential candidate of the Democrats in 2004, I guess it was. And so all of this referred back, he said, to this event. And he covered a lot of material. It looked really convincing. But he was only dealing with about 3 verses out of the entire chapter. Well, I had, long before that, I had noted back in 2001 itself that it was the day on which Jesus had been born as reckoned by our calendar.
Yeah.
Because you'd have to go to my website, thetimequest.com, and look for information about the birth of Jesus on there. I wish I could give you, I can't recall what I called that page, but you can find it if you look from the first page. But the interesting thing was that I knew right away what day it was. And I have to explain that Jesus would have been born the night before on the September 10th. But in the Hebrew calendar, the morning of September 11th was the same Hebrew day. So, and there's some controversy about that because people don't distinguish between the evening of the 10th and the day part of the 11th. But in any case, but that was the day. Now, whether it was Muhammad's birthday or not, nobody knows because Islam has long since forgotten the exact timing of Muhammad's birthday. So nobody really knows about that. People have speculated on that regard. But if you go back to this prophecy that Jonathan Cahn has been writing about and talking about in Isaiah 9, the first part of it is a prophecy of the birth of Jesus. In other words, the day that the event occurred is also indicated in the text. Now, that's what I call being picky.
Yeah.
God is very picky. He didn't just, I mean, this didn't happen on just any day. Okay? Now, here's something else that Jonathan Cahn did not notice and didn't realize. In other words, he's right. He's right in drawing the attention to this. But what he didn't know was not only is the exact day prophesied, when it would occur, that it would be on, in other words, the date that would be reckoned the birth of Jesus in our calendar, even though we don't recognize it or keep it or acknowledge it. But a couple verses or so after this, it says, and his arm is outstretched still. Now, Jonathan Cahn, I'm sure, wouldn't know what that referred to either, but I do. That refers to the object we've been talking about in 2 preceding files, namely Typhon.
Yes.
And Typhon is the arm of the Lord, sometimes called the sword of the Lord in the Old Testament. Now, it isn't always. I mean, there are other things that happen in the sky that are referred to that way because God uses things as tools to carry out his purposes. But that statement, his arm is stretched out still, today cannot refer to Mercury or Mars or Venus. They're not stretched out. They don't have an extended tail. They don't have any kind of debris cloud, if you will, accompanying them. But Typhon does, and it's still stretched out. And in fact, not only is it stretched out, but we cross the orbit of this object twice a year. And especially in late June, early July, when bad things have a tendency to happen. Now, in 1908, in Siberia, an object, a fireball, exploded over Tunguska in Siberia, and it leveled an entire forest. And in fact, the leveling was so devastating, and the fire that occurred was so, it was like a flash burn of the entire forest in an instant. And when people looked at it, they said it looks like a low-altitude nuclear explosion had taken place. Now, it wasn't. But eventually they figured out it's what happens when a comet comes into the atmosphere and explodes. They were able to calculate the results and compare it to what would happen if a comet did that. And they said it was a very close match. So they're pretty well convinced now that a comet exploded over Siberia on June 30th, 1908. Well, there's a little bit of a problem here. The actual latitude of that event, had the Earth been rotating for a few hours more before it hit? In other words, if the Earth's spin had changed just slightly by a hair a few million years ago, and it had added up, so that by this time in 1908, it was rotated around a little further, that comet would have exploded right over downtown London. And it would have devastated the entire city of London, and the recent Olympics would never have been held there. Trust me on that. The city of London would cease to have existed, and so would the British Empire.
And so would the British banks.
And the British banking system, upon which the world at the time was largely dependent, including the United States, which those banks had just bailed out thanks to J.P. Morgan going over there and borrowing a ton of gold. I think it was almost literally a ton, actually. Which some people think put us in debt to the British, and we are just now trying to wiggle our way out of it. And there's a lot of consternation over that issue. I don't really know the ins and outs of the details of all of that, but I've heard people allude to it. And so it's not a minor thing that comets can fall out of the sky and cause bad stuff to happen on the Earth. That just missed being a tragedy of the first magnitude. You take out the British Empire and the British banks at a time when they were bailing out the United States, and what do you think Germany would have done in World War I? Or to put it another way, I think we'd all be singing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles today. So that changed the history of the world. The fact that it hit in Siberia, which was fairly harmless, versus hitting London. Now, these things happen on a regular basis. It turns out that in the last few years, there's been a huge increase in the number of fireballs. These are basically meteor fragments, comet fragments falling into the Earth's atmosphere, especially in late June. And I've the American Meteorological Society has a website where professional observers report fireballs and document the azimuth and all kinds of other technical details about them. So I went in and I created a chart of these. There is a chart up there on a Zeta Talk Nancy Leader website, which is not accurate. It is not accurate. Whoever did the chart was not paying attention, because half the data in the chart is observations of the same fireball as opposed to just the single fireball observations. If you follow the difference here.
Olaf, is she the one that strangled her dog?
Yeah, this is the lady who thought Planet X was going to come by, I think, in 2004 or 5 or something, and she strangled her dog and moved and abandoned her husband.
Oh, gosh.
And which is a shame because, I mean, she's an intelligent person, but she just seems to have tied her brain up in knots over this thing and gotten herself to the point where she thinks she's hearing voices of aliens from Zeta Reticuli.
Oh, dear.
And which is really sad because she's a bright lady, and if you go to the websites that she has, there's some amazingly interesting material up there, all of which, unfortunately, is, can be discredited by the authorities who simply say, well, the person who posts this on her site is, and then they can talk all about her for, 5 minutes telling you things that will make your hair stand on end.
Yeah.
So, Nancy, unfortunately, is not the right messenger for this really important information. She's talking about Earth changes. She's talking about a lot of strange things that are happening. And she's lucked into actual Earth changes that are actually occurring and things that are really happening out there. And so this poor woman who
dog strangler.
Well, I mean,
there's no excuse for that.
She strangled her dog. She said she killed her with her own hands. I don't know what that means. I guess it could mean strangle. But the point is that she's not the best messenger for this because she's so easy to discredit. She's discredited herself, in effect. And what I'm concerned about, what I'm really worried about, is that people won't take this kind of information seriously because it's being handled by, let's just say, flaky amateurs.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's really a problem. There's a chart on one of her websites, I think she's got 2 of them now, that shows the fireball activity over the last 8 years, I guess it is, going back to 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And the numbers on the first 4 years are accurate. The numbers for the last 4 years are not accurate. They greatly exaggerate the totals because instead of counting actual fireballs, they're counting multiple observations of the same fireballs.
Mm-hmm.
And so the numbers are much greater there. Yes, there's an increase. Yes, it's escalating geometrically. It's just not escalating as geometrically as it appears on that chart because the last 4 years have been exaggerated and distorted. I went back to the original actual scientifically reported data and reconstructed the correct chart because I was trying to find the source material. I stumbled on her chart. It wasn't done by her. It was done by one of her followers. It didn't make any sense because I couldn't find the data that would match that until I figured out what had happened. So it's half a chart.
Yeah.
That's right. So I've got the correct chart in one of my reports, but all you really need to know is this, that the numbers have gone from about 463 in 2005 to well over 1,000 now. So in fact, I think it's approaching 2,000 or something for 2012. So we have seen a huge increase in the number of fireballs being reported. And it's pretty much a steady increase throughout this period. And that means they've tripled in 5 years, tripled in 8 years. And in 9 years, this year, it will probably close to quadrupling. We'll have to wait till the end of the year to find out for sure. But Peter Davenport at the National UFO Reporting Center out in Davenport, Washington, has a website where he's been keeping track of these things as reports of UFOs because people are seeing clusters of fireballs. Now that's very odd. It means that the material's breaking up, and that's almost certainly of cometary origins. And it means that we're looking at something extraordinarily serious, because it means that a lot of cometary material from comets that have, from a much larger collection of comets, is coming into the solar system and into the Earth's orbit, all at about the same time in a single short period, typically around June of each year. Now, I shouldn't say all at that time, because it's stretched around the year. But what's happening is there's a big bump in June, and that bump is about triple the normal background rate. And we know this from a counter. We got 4 seismic counters the astronauts put on the moon, and they record impacts, and they triple in June. Okay, and there's another little bump toward the end of the year on the other half of the orbit. Okay, so what we can say is this is known as the Taurid meteor stream, and the Taurid meteor stream had a really big event in it, apparently about 5,000 years ago, and another one about 10,000 years ago, and another one about 20,000 years ago. And we know that because 2 British astronomers, Victor Clube and Bill Napier, documented the periodicities of various objects connected to this meteor stream, and were able to calculate back that events had occurred in roughly in those time frames. They wrote 2 books, one called The Cosmic Serpent, and the other one, The Cosmic Winter. And Clube is spelled C-L-U-B-E. So if you want to look those up on Amazon and get e-books or regular books on those, they may be available there. I haven't checked yet, but I'm going to see if I don't have The Cosmic Winter, but I do have The Cosmic Serpent and other books which have talked about it. This means that there's a huge event going on right in front of our eyes here. And Peter Davenport has been getting these reports of multiple fireballs on multiple occasions in multiple locations piling up in June. And June of 2010, there was a huge increase in it. June of 2011, another huge increase. And then in June 2012, another big increase. Maybe
that's what's causing a lot of the forest fires.
Yes, I absolutely am convinced that some of these things are reaching the ground.
Yeah.
Now, if you go to the American Meteorological Society website, they will say, no, they don't reach the ground. Well, I'm sorry. I hate to disagree with a reputable scientific organization that was founded in 1911, but I have a book by a meteor expert, a guy who specializes in that field and works for NASA. And he has documented dozens of examples of fireballs setting fires. So I'm sorry, but they do. And he has a very detailed list of these things. So there is no question that this does happen. And I think some of the fires that were set out west were not random acts of arson attributed to, uncaught arsonists or stray bullets bouncing off of rocks and creating sparks. I think these things were actually due to some of these fireballs reaching the Earth and setting fires off. The Earth is tinder dry out west, and it doesn't take a whole lot to do it. So, and that, by the way, may be a function of this debris cloud that's entered into our solar system. Now, you don't have this much debris clustering together and building up to a geometric increase climax of some sort in our fairly near future, probably within the next decade, you don't have that without having a really big thing in the middle holding it together gravitationally. Well, we know of a number of comets over the last 200 years that have broken up and have left behind meteor streams. And the meteors are mostly dust and dirt and gravel that are spread fairly evenly around the orbits of these comets, these dead comets. And that debris is usually seen as a little spark of white light in the sky, that shoots down in a brief split second.
Mm-hmm.
But these fireballs are being seen for several minutes in clusters, and then another one will come by a few moments later. That's a really intense concentration of fireballs, and as I pointed out, it's been increasing exponentially for the better part of the last decade. This seems to indicate that we're getting closer to the core of a meteor stream or comet collection that has a really massive body embedded inside it. And this, I believe, since we could go back 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20,000 years ago and find events that line up with this, which I've been documenting in my reports on the subject, if we look at that pattern, it indicates to me an orbit of about 5,000 years. It's a little over 5,000 years. Now, we do know of something that fits that, and that's that Mayan calendar, which is it's 5,125.36 years. Now, when I went back and did the calculation, I did the day-by-day calculation on this thing to see exactly what we were looking at here. And I began to realize there's something wrong with our assumptions about the Mayan calendar's precision, because the 1,872,000 days in that calendar, by the way, they had 4 other calendars, but this particular one is a 360-day calendar. And they multiplied the 360 days by 20, get 7,200 days, which was 20 years, which is a generational cycle, okay? When you're 20, you're about the peak of your athletic and physical capabilities, certainly as a male. When you're 40, you enter middle age, When you're 60, you enter old age. So this is a generational cycle they were looking at. But it's also a cycle of the conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn. And it also comes very close to one of the lunar eclipse cycle things. So it does appear as though they had some crude understanding of some of these other cycles. And 20 times 20 years was 400 years. Every 400 years, the Mayans and their predecessors, the Olmecs, would pick up and move to a new location and start farming at a new place, which apparently was, I thought at first it was just because the land got exhausted and they couldn't keep growing stuff. There's only so much corn you can leach out of the ground, But it may be that they had a ritual reason behind it, that every 400 years, which was 1,440, which was 144,000 days of 360-day years. Okay, that's when they would move. Well, that's based on a 360-day year, and as I pointed out in one of the preceding files we did, they were living in a period when the year was 365 days long, and so were the Olmecs, who preceded them. Now, the Olmec, O-L-M-E-C, that Olmec civilization, some people think goes back as far as 5,000 years, which would be just the beginning of this most recent cycle. And I've pointed out that I believe the only culture that was around long enough to know about this was the Egyptian. So they're the only ones in position, and during their period of history, they also kept a 360-day year. And according to Immanuel Velikovsky, there was a time back in the period when Egypt was flourishing when we had a 360-day year, and the whole world apparently had one. So something happened to disturb the Earth sufficiently that our orbit was lengthened by 5¼ days. And during that time, the Egyptians added 5 days to their calendar. And they named them after 5 prominent Egyptian gods to commemorate the event. I think Osiris and Isis and Horus and so on. So the point is, there must have been a period when the Earth had a different orbit, slightly, but a significantly different orbit, so that you would need something big to come by the Earth to move the planet Earth out of its old orbit into the current orbit. And an object that came by that close and did that much of a move to the Earth would be a planet, not a comet. So, Mercury is 1/18th the mass of the Earth. Big, but I'm not sure it's big enough to do that job. I mean, I could be wrong. Mars is 1/9th the mass of the Earth. Again, it's a planet, but I'm not sure it's big enough to change the orbit of the Earth that much. I'm beginning to think that the object that did this was Typhon, which itself may be as big as the Earth. And I believe that's what's embedded inside this cloud of fireballs that we are entering into, or to put it a little differently, that is entering into our solar system that we're crossing the path of in June and November. So what it looks like is going on here is that Typhon's leading edge of fireball, cometary, meteorite debris, it has already crossed our path. It has been crossing our path for several years now. In other words, it's crossing our orbit, and as we go around, we keep passing through it. And as it comes into the inner solar system, it's getting spread by the Earth around our orbit. We gravitationally pick this stuff up and just sort of spread it around the whole length of our orbit, so that the number of fireball impacts is increasing. We're seeing the Earth become, if you will, a target for this debris field, but it's simply the first opening salvo in what is going to become an ever more intense bombardment with ever larger objects, leading up to the climax, which will come when the Big Daddy himself, Typhon, comes by, and it's the size of the Earth, or at least it used to be. I think I've mentioned previously that I believe that Typhon is the object that knocked over Uranus. Uranus is 15 times as big as the Earth, or 14 and a half to be really picky about it. And an object big enough to knock over Uranus and keep on rolling like the ever-ready bunny? I'm sorry. And that object, I think it's like a big ball of iron. It's like a wrecking ball. And if that's what's embedded in this cloud of debris, then we're in for a really rough time. And I can well understand how the Earth could get knocked around like a little ping pong ball by this thing. It's a major object. Now, this is not Nancy Lieder's Planet X, which she thinks is 4 times the size of the Earth, and she is lining up with Zechariah Sitchin's Nibiru object. This has nothing to do with any of that. Okay, she's a very confused woman. But in monitoring the actual Earth changes that are going on, including fireball activity, she has accidentally stumbled into something real. And this something real is a much bigger object. Now, let's look closer at our object, the Earth, to see if there's evidence for anything bad happening in our past that might indicate, aside from legends of a 360-day year and stuff like that, that might indicate how bad a time we could have. If you look at the Earth without the water, underneath the Earth's oceans, we have what we call mid-ocean ridges. Now, that's a very deceptive name. Number one, they're not always in the middle of the ocean. And number two, it's not one ridge, it's two on either side of a lava wound that is bleeding lava out from inside the Earth. The Earth is a ball of molten lava. Strip away the continents and the oceans and the seafloor for a moment. That's just a crust. That's a cold lava crust, which we call granite. But if you take that granite and you remove it, it's just the skim on the top of the lava. And most of the Earth is basically a big molten glob of liquid rock. And we're floating on it. And the seafloor is, if you will, is wounded. It's cut open. It's been ruptured. And the lava is just flowing right out all the time. And that white-hot lava that's bubbling up from the seafloor, as soon as it hits the cold water of the oceans, it starts to solidify. But you've got to understand something. We have an open wound as if somebody had taken a knife and slit the Earth from top to bottom and back up again and around the other side. And let me describe that in specific detail. Starting in the Arctic Ocean, at the top of the world, slit down between the Americas and Europe, between South America and Africa, keep on going around Africa, up the Indian Ocean toward India, and bank sharply to the left into the Red Sea area, and then make a sharp left down Africa to Lake Victoria. And in Lake Victoria, take the ridge and split it open and put Lake Victoria in the middle and wrap it around. Because Lake Victoria is like a gigantic volcanic lava. Well, let me put it a little differently. It is probably the biggest volcano on the planet. And right now it's got water in it. That isn't a lake. That is a volcanic opening into the heart of the Earth. Now, I think it's plugged at the moment because Africa's been moved. Africa is not where it should be. And I'll explain that as we go forward here. I want to give you the big picture. Also coming out of this is a branch that goes up through the Jordan River Valley, up through the Dead Sea, the Jordan River Valley, up through the Sea of Galilee, and on up into Lebanon and into Turkey. And that is called the Great Rift Valley. That is the biggest earthquake fault zone on the surface of the continents. But this thing down on the sea floor dwarfs that. I mean, that's nothing. That's a little crack compared to the giant gaping fissure in the earth that the mid-ocean ridge constitutes. Okay? But that's nothing. The ridge itself has been sliced up by a giant sushi chef standing on Lake Victoria, because all the cut lines through the mid-ocean ridge, starting from the Arctic Ocean, all the way down the Atlantic, around the south of Africa, up the Indian Ocean, has been sliced through, and each of these fault lines points right at Lake Victoria, now allowing for the shift of Africa out of its original position, by the way. But if you put Africa back where it should be, Lake Victoria is at the center of all of these sushi chef chop marks, and each one of those little fault lines running perpendicular right through the mid-ocean ridge, chopping it up, is a bigger fault than anything on the surface of the Earth, including the so-called Great Rift Valley, which is nothing compared to these chop marks that cut through the mid-ocean ridge. That's just one mid-ocean ridge. Branching out in the Indian Ocean from the South Indian Ocean, from that mid-ocean ridge, is another ridge which goes down below Australia, across the South Pacific, up offshore to the west of South America, and then dives under California and goes up under Nevada, up under Utah. Salt Lake City and Las Vegas are sitting on top of what appears to be a gigantic lava fissure underneath the North American continent.
Oh my gosh.
It doesn't stop there.
Oh.
It keeps on going up the Pacific coast, up underneath the Rocky and Cascade Mountains, up through Canada, up through the Canadian Rockies, into Alaska, where the highest point in North America is found, Mount McKinley. And there are strange goings-on in Alaska around Mount McKinley, besides Sarah Palin. And that area up there seems to be the terminus of this mid-ocean ridge. It just seems to stop there. Now, what's interesting about it is, it looks to me as though, if you look at and again, the Susie Chef has been at work on the Pacific Ridge. But the center of that is near the Philippines. In other words, there are two places on the Earth where something happened that caused the entire planet to crack thousands of miles away from an event occurring at a very limited geographic spot. In one case, the Lake Victoria region, and in the other case, near the Philippines. Well, I got to looking at these, and I thought, that's odd. And then I decided to connect them with a straight line. And then I noticed that the middle of the straight line crossed the equator, and one was equidistant above the equator, and one was equidistant below the equator. And how far equidistant? Well, one was on the Tropic of Cancer, and one was on the Tropic of Capricorn. Now, that indicates the reason why the Earth tilts is connected to these things. And notice the whole structure of the planet, the reason it's tilted the way it is, the structure of the Earth's equator, poles, the whole layout of the planet, is in some way defined by these events that cause these fissures that fracture these mid-ocean ridges and basically split open the seafloor all around the planet. Something really bad happened to us. Now, geologists are just beginning to accept the idea that the ocean is spreading apart and pushing continents around. I disagree. I don't think that's what pushed the continents around, because North America is sitting on top of one of these ridges. California, Utah, Nevada, the Rockies, that's all part of this structure that's sitting on top of this Pacific mid-ocean ridge that's nowhere near the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's on the side of it. And if you look at the end of the spreading of the lava out from the Pacific Ridge, it stops around Hawaii. So what moved Asia half an ocean further to the west? What slid Asia up, a quarter of the way or whatever it is, around the world? Let's go back to Africa. I mentioned to you that Lake Victoria is not where it's supposed to be. In other words, it's not exactly where it would have been if it was simply shoved by the mid-ocean ridge spreading. because all of Africa is jarred out of position. It's been dragged a little bit to the north and torqued around a little bit, turned and rotated slightly. Something took Africa and pulled it toward India. Oh, but that's not all. India got whipped off of the South Indian Ocean ridge. Remember where I said it was there was a big branch that went out underneath the Pacific, underneath of Australia, across the Pacific? Well, India used to be sitting on that 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs went extinct. India was sitting there, and something took India and picked it off of that ridge, slid it down onto the sea floor, and then whipped it to the north and slammed it into Asia, hit the underbelly of Asia, and created Tibet and the Himalaya Mountains, and for that matter, the mountains of Southeast Asia that all those Viet Cong were hanging out in during the Vietnam War. It also seems to have created the deserts, because before you slam India into Asia, the areas just to the north of it would have been, that is the part it would have hit, were the Gobi Desert, the Taklamakan Desert, and around to the Persian Desert to the left, and further down you have the Arabian Desert, the Kalahari Desert, and you go around to the right and you have the Western Desert of Australia. Got a picture here? Everything was desert in the path of India as it moved north. And I got to thinking, what could have caused all of these things in this gigantic pattern of deserts ahead of India before it slammed into Asia? And why would it have created such a massive string of mountains, the highest in the world? And then I looked at the seafloor. Down on the seafloor are the tracks of India being pulled to the north by something. And I say pulled because it slides uphill when it hits Asia. Now, I don't care about this seafloor spreading thing, because it should have pushed India into Australia, not north into Asia. The seafloor spreading doesn't match. And the Ganges and Indus River of India have left alluvial deposits on the floor of the Indian Ocean, but not down in the South Indian Ocean, just up north where they're located. And I couldn't figure out what was happening here, because I kept trying to go along with the slow motion geology explanation for it. It just didn't make sense until I tried an alternative idea. What if something had picked India up, literally lifted it up, caused the lava flow to occur 65 million years ago, slammed India in a few hours from the South Indian Ocean through the Indian Ocean to the north with a tidal wave of water and sulfuric acid because of the volcanic activity going on into South Asia, so that the Himalayas were created not slowly and gradually, but violently and suddenly. And ahead of India, as it was moving north at what must have been faster than the speed of sound, was a tidal wave like nothing the world has seen since. A tidal wave of salt water full of sulfuric acid that poured out onto southern Asia, western Australia, Arabia, Persia, East Africa, salting the earth, if you will, and killing every living thing in its path, creating nothing but desert in a great arc. Okay, if you could see the map and you could look at it, kind of visualize this, and see part of Southeast Asia being attached to India and being moved north with this. it actually makes a tremendous amount of sense. It explains what you see there and how it all could have happened in a very short period of time, provided you had something big enough and massive enough passing over the Earth at the time, close enough to actually move India and Africa out of their old positions and into their new positions where we find them now. That object moving in that direction would have then passed over Siberia, over Canada, over America, and over the Yucatan before, if you will, departing. Now, that path has been littered with massive cosmic impact craters, the last of which in Yucatan has been given the credit for the extinction of the dinosaurs at that same time. I think, and by the way, astronomer John Gribbon and his wife Mary wrote a book called Fire on Earth back in the 90s, I think in 95, 96, which goes into some of these impact areas, and he thought, mistakenly, that the sequence was in the other direction, that is, starting with the Yucatan, then in Manson, Iowa, then in Canada, and then in Siberia. So he thought it went the other way. Okay, I don't think so. I think the motion of India and the array of deserts shows a motion toward the north from the Indian Ocean going over the top of the Earth and down the other side. The reason the dinosaurs were wiped out was because about, I know this is going to sound strange, but it's true, about 1/4 of everything on the Earth that could burn, burned to total destruction, completely to soot. Now, we still have dinosaur bones. We still have a lot of fossil material. So what wasn't fossilized and drowned was totally incinerated. There was a complete destruction of anything big. The only survivors were small things that hid in caves. Sort of like the book of Revelation, chapter 6, where it talks about people hiding in caves from what's coming. And this destruction completely wiped out, I think it's 75% of all of the species on the planet. I mean, just everything got obliterated that couldn't hide in a cave. Fortunately, little dinosaurs that we call chickens could hide in the caves, and we could eat eggs. But, and by the way, that's our perfect protein, is a chicken egg. It has the perfect balance of amino acids for human beings, which gives you an idea of how adapted mammals are to the protein of this little flying dinosaur that doesn't fly much anymore. But this is what was able to survive from that era. Now, we've got this thing coming back on a regular orbit, okay? And these things happen on a frequent basis. And it must have been going on before that. I believe that this planet's been sculpted, has been carved up, has been pounded, has been molded like a great cosmic potter who is making a piece of pottery. And his arms are, if you will, these objects, these gigantic things that combine the Earth and shape it and mold it and chop it up
and murder a lot of people.
Well, there weren't any people back in those days. There were dinosaurs, which you wouldn't want around now anyway. Okay, but we needed the dinosaurs in order to get birds, in order to have chickens, so that we could have this really nice source of cheap protein, which is, chickens can go out and scratch in the yard. You hardly have to feed them anything, and they produce a daily source of protein so that you can survive. I mean, anybody looking to survive, what's one of the first things anybody tells them to do? If you want to set up a survival retreat, get some chickens. Without those chickens, it'd be a lot harder to survive. This is fresh, perfect protein every day from something that you hardly have to feed at all. I think God was looking out for us. Frankly, I think that's an amazing miracle that something like that is even around. And the poorest person in the world can survive with chickens. So, and they're terribly prolific, by the way. So this is this is actually a blessing, and it has sculpted the earth and made it possible for us to be here. Remember, this planet is basically a big chunk of molten lava. To have land at all is nice. Okay, and to have it divided up the way it is has allowed us to survive while other parts of the world got enslaved by people. We're lucky to be free. And I don't think we would have been free if we were still all one big continent, one big Pangea. But it's been broken up by Typhon, and I think it's a twin brother, because there had to be another half to the core of the planet before it broke up. So these objects come around. They have shaped and molded the earth, and as he says in Isaiah, he's like a potter, and he's been pottering mankind, pottering the earth. The same term is actually used in Genesis when it's talking about the creation of the earth. So we know that this is the way this thing's been put together. And when we look at the potential here, we can see that this is a very dangerous situation. And if we weren't being warned, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. But you know what? Everybody's been warned. I've been looking at the cultures all over the planet: China, India, Persia, Europe, Africa, the Americas. Everybody knew that this was going to happen. They know about how many times it's happened and what's going to happen next and so forth. And they have prophecies about what's going to happen after this age is brought to an end and the next age begins. They've got the whole blueprint laid out, including the rabbis, including Jesus and the apostles talking about it, and Revelation and so forth. Everybody has been told. The only people who don't believe it are supposedly the scientists. They don't want to believe it because there's so many agnostics and atheists among them, and they say, oh, this is all silliness. And the fireballs keep falling, and they keep increasing, and people keep reporting them. And the scientists keep saying, oh, these things don't start fires. Don't worry about it. Nothing going on here. Keep moving. Nothing happening. And the people are saying, wait a minute. There is something happening. And they look for somebody to report it to. They end up reporting it to Nancy Leader or the UFO guy out in Washington. And it should be science dealing with it. Now, I suspect the scientists know. Some of them. I suspect the government knows. Some of it. I suspect they think we are too fragile to tell. They think that if they told the people, there'd be a panic. Same excuse they use for not telling us about UFOs or whatever. It's always, oh, they're too stupid. They're too unstable. We can't tell them. Don't tell them what would happen. They loot the grocery store. The way they do before every snowstorm or every hurricane. Well, they might, and then they'd restock the store, and after a while people would settle in and they'd go back to watching Dancing with the Stars. The fact is that this is a slow, gradual increase, and I think the reason that one of the reasons this happens is because God wants to warn us. He wants people to get some knowledge, and he's aware that the politicians and the scientists and so forth are going to think to hide it from people and not tell them. Oh, I'm not going to hide it from you. God doesn't want it hidden from you. All of the priests, religions, and ancient cultures, they didn't want it hidden from you. They were all trying to warn their people. The Mayans didn't want it hidden from you. Everybody was trying to warn you that something was coming. Now, the Mayan prophecies, the latest inscription they've recently found, indicates that you know what's going to happen? There's going to be an increase in the number of objects falling from the sky. and is going to continue for years and is going to usher in a new age. So here we have this rather crude 360-day Mayan calendar anticipating that something's going to happen at some point that will occur at a cycle, but it isn't being precise about the moment when Typhon comes back. It's just saying that this is the period when it's going to occur. That, I think, is what the Mayan calendar is really telling us. It's anticipating a time frame in which you should begin looking up at the sky and anticipating these objects coming. And, of course, now we see them. They're here. And this escalation of fireballs is occurring. And the thing that follows it is embedded somewhere in that cloud of debris, and that's coming too. And what the Mayans were simply trying to do is to get that generation that would deal with it to start getting ready. And that's what we should be doing. We should start getting ready. Get your chickens. Get your chickens lined up. Get your your stockpiles of batteries or whatever. Start accumulating things. Every time you go to the store, pick up something. And I don't mean fried chicken. But you ought to be thinking about where you can go that will be on high enough ground that the tidal waves will not affect you, but not near volcanic and earthquake zones that are going to be dangerous. But you've got to be high ground, well enough inland to be in a safe area. That's where you want your chickens.
That's very, very interesting and scary, Olaf.
I mean, if people could see the planet without the water, they begin to understand how vulnerable we really are.
Yes.
And these continents, North America clearly has slid right over one of these so-called mid-ocean ridges.
Oh.
Obviously, there's something wrong with this idea that that's what's moving the continents around. Something bigger this way comes.
Yeah.
And when it gets here, it moves continents around. It slides things around on the surface of the Earth, and it makes for some very bizarre arrangements of things on this planet. And that's why you have, sudden ice ages where mammoths get flash frozen, the slid into a cold area. I'm not so sure that the locations of events on this planet, volcanoes and ridges and so forth, I'm not sure this is just some sort of random arrangement either. I'm exploring some evidence that indicates some more design and symmetry and reasoning behind why everything is where it is and how it got that way and what's going to happen next to us.
Wow. Well, give everybody your contact information, Olaf.
Yes, if you dare. You can go to theTimeQuest.com, and there's some information there. But you go to my distributor's website to subscribe to the CDs, and that'll get you started. We start with Mars there because Mars is something that's going to be knocked out of position, and we mentioned that a Kuiper Belt object, namely Typhon, as we eventually call it, is going to move it. And we start talking about Mars there, and that's where the story began as I tracked it back. And that website for my distributor is before 2012 and beyond.com. And you can subscribe to the CDs there. And also there are files that you can download. We cover a lot of territory in our discussions, and you'll find other things that are equally amazing as we explore and unravel the mysteries of what the Bible is talking about, what the Old and New Testaments were really referring to in a lot of these very mysterious passages. That are also the subject of discussion by a lot of other cultures as well. The Bible is not the only place these things were discussed, but it is one place where we can find a reliable testimony to what has happened and is going to happen.
Okay. And you can always go to the Bite Show and go to the audio library and click on Olaf Hage's name, and his page will open up with links to all the audio files that we've worked on over the years. So
now, there's 2 preceding files that talk about Typhon. I forgot what we called them, but probably I hope Typhon's in the name.
So God bless everyone out there that's listening. Please pay attention. Good night, everybody.